Today, we're going to be going over a rather brutal story that occurred within the city of Jerusalem whenever it was besieged in 70 AD by the Romans. Now, before I tell of this event, I would like to preface it with something that God warned Israel back in the days of Moses, and it's recorded in Deuteronomy 28. It's with these blessings and cursings. And basically, what God is saying is, if you stay with me, I'll bless you. If you turn against me, however, I will curse you. And this is one of the curses that fell upon this woman as well as the entire city of Jerusalem. Let's get right into it. Deuteronomy 28:1 says this, "And it shall come to pass, if thou shalt hearken diligently unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe and to do all his commandments, which I command thee this day, that the Lord thy God will set thee on high above all nations of the earth." Moses goes on to name off all these many blessings that will occur if they just stay with the Lord. And then we come to verse 15, "But it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe and to do all his commandments and his statutes, which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee." It's then that many more curses than blessings are named, like 3 times as many. This is one of the last times that Moses will actually address the nation of Israel before his death. Notice in verse 28, one of these curses, "The Lord shall smite thee with madness and blindness and astonishment of heart." Can any of us really imagine the depths of sorrow one would feel if God decides to curse a certain person or a city or a nation with madness? And for any of you that's ever suffered mentally in your life, depression, panic attacks, whatever, this is heightened to an entirely new level, because we then go on and in verse 53 we read, "And thou shalt eat the fruit of thine own body," speaking of their children, "the flesh of thy sons and of thy daughters, which the Lord thy God hath given thee, in the siege and in the straitness wherewith thine enemies shall distress thee." He's speaking of whenever they are besieged and an enemy comes against their city, be it Jerusalem, whoever, and suddenly a famine strikes the land because they're running out of food. That's one of the main purposes behind a besiegement. But suddenly they're running out of food, and in desperation, people will begin to eat their own children. "The tender and delicate woman among you, which would not adventure to set the sole of her foot upon the ground for delicateness and tenderness. Her eyes shall be evil toward the husband of her bosom, and toward her son, and toward her daughter, and toward her young one that cometh out from between her feet, and toward her children, which she shall bear, for she shall eat them for want of all things secretly in the siege and straitness, wherewith thine enemies shall distress thee in thy gates." Now, if you have any type of knowledge of the Old Testament, then you know how the Israelites, they would fall away from God to this extent. Matter of fact, just before Moses goes upon Mount Nebo to take a look at the Promised Land and die, just before he does that, the Lord tells him how even the crowd that he was telling these curses to, he said, even they, even now, he says, are they planning rebellion against him. And after that, Moses himself, he even says, if you're already having this within your own hearts while I'm alive, how much worse will it be when I'm gone? Over the next few centuries, it became a roller coaster ride of sorts. The people, they'd get right with God, then they'd fall away, then they'd get right again, then they'd fall away, then a prophet would be raised up. And if you know the Old Testament, you know this is a common theme. And suddenly, it comes to a pinnacle in the days of Samaria, whenever the kingdoms divide and you have the northern kingdom and then you have the southern kingdom of Judah. Well, the northern kingdom of Israel, they become besieged by the Syrians to the north. And suddenly these old warnings of these curses, they just come flooding right back into reality whenever the people, these northern tribes, are besieged. Famine starts to settle in, then madness, and it becomes like a domino effect. Everything just starts to build upon itself. Well, whenever it comes to this cannibalism that's described, which is really the worst of the worst that it can possibly get for anyone. Well, we know that such a thing happened during the Syrian besiegement of Samaria in 2 Kings 6. "And as the king of Israel was passing by upon the wall, there cried a woman unto him, saying, Help, my lord, O king. And he said, If the Lord do not help thee, whence shall I help thee? Out of the barn floor, or out of the winepress? And the king said unto her, What aileth thee? And she answered, This woman said unto me, Give thy son, that we may eat him today, and we will eat my son tomorrow. So we boiled my son, and did eat him. And I said unto her on the next day, Give thy son, that we may eat him. And she hath hid her son. And it came to pass, when the king heard the words of the woman, that he rent his clothes, he ripped his clothes, and he passed by upon the wall. And the people looked, and behold, he had sackcloth within upon his flesh. We also read of this occurring within Jerusalem during the Babylonian besiegement in Lamentations 2:20 and chapter 4. They that be slain with the sword are better than they that be slain with hunger, for these pine away, stricken through for want of the fruits of the field. The hands of the pitiful women have sodden their own children. They were their meat in the destruction of the daughter of my people. Which brings us to the narrative at hand. There is a particularly distressing account, very much similar to these others, recorded by Flavius Josephus during the Roman siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD. A once wealthy woman named Mary of Bethezuba had fled to Jerusalem during the Roman war. All her treasures and food had been plundered by the Jewish defenders of the city during the siege. Maddened by hunger, she took the infant at her breast and said to him, Poor little mite, in war, famine, and civil strife, why should I keep you alive? With the Romans there is only slavery, and that only if alive when they come, but famine is forestalling slavery, and the partisans are crueler than either. Come, you must be food for me. To the partisans an avenging spirit, and to the world a tale, the only thing left to fill up the measure of Jewish misery. And in defiance to all natural feeling, as Flavius Josephus writes, she killed her son, then roasted him, and ate one half of him, and hid the rest. Almost immediately, the rebels of the city appeared, sniffing the unholy smell, as it's written, and threatened to kill her on the spot unless she revealed what she had prepared. As she uncovered what was left of the child, she offered them a share. They left her in horror, and the entire city could not stop thinking of this crime and abomination. When the news reached the Romans, some refused to believe, some were distressed, but on most the effect was to add enormously to their detestation of the enemy at hand. Titus, the Roman general at the time, disclaimed all responsibility as he had repeatedly offered peace and amnesty for surrender. So now we get a slight glimpse into the depths of this madness that overtakes people whenever God has cursed them. Because we see how this ordinary, well-off, apparently young woman, because she had a baby, how she became so afflicted in mind and body that she became a type of, like Jeffrey Dahmer, like a serial killer. As she uncovered what was left of the child, she offered them a share. How much more detached from reality can one possibly be? But if we examine all three of these accounts, then we notice how in Samaria, with the first event, that happened in 845 BC after years of idolatry, many decades of idolatry for them. And in Jerusalem in 586 BC, that occurred after years of rejecting God. They even rejected and told Jeremiah to basically shut up, leave them alone, and they listened to these false prophets over and over. And then in this final case, that also happened in Jerusalem in 70 AD, and that was right after they rejected Christ. It was exactly 40 years after they had rejected Christ. But unlike the other times, once Israel rejected her promised Messiah, they lost their entire nation, not just their capitals for a time, as in these other accounts. It would not be until 1948, less than 100 years ago, that the nation of Israel would be reborn and the Jewish people reestablish ownership of the land. And my friends, if you think such tragedies are long gone and in the past, well, you don't have a clue about the book of Revelation, because we read in Matthew 24 where Jesus is informing his disciples about the times and how they'll be before his second coming. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? Jesus goes on to tell them about nation rising against nation, false Christ, false prophets, and all of these. He then says this, Now the brother shall betray the brother to death, and the father, the son, the children shall rise up against their parents and shall cause them to be put to death. Your most cherished loved ones, if you're alive during those years, in other words, if you miss the rapture and you're here for that 7-year period of tribulation and great tribulation, the wrath of God and such, if you're here for that, then you really can't trust anyone at that time. It's going to get so much worse. Jesus even says that it's as a time that has never been, no, nor ever shall be again. Just as Revelation 6 tells us, and I looked and behold a pale horse. Now this is speaking of the final 7 years leading up to Christ, which is right around the corner, mind you. And I looked and behold a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him in order to take the people that he kills. Most people are going to go to hell during that time. And power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth, that's billions of people, to kill with sword and with hunger and with death and with the beast of the earth.